we're getting out of college and we have the faintest idea what we want to do. So I always ask the question, what would you like to do if money were no object? How would you really enjoy spending your life? When we finally got down to something which the individual says he really wants to do, I will say to him, you do that. Forget the money. Because if you say that getting the money is the most important thing, you will spend your life completely wasting your time. You'll be doing things you don't like doing in order to go on living, that is, to go on doing things you don't like doing. Better to have a short life that is full of what you like doing than a long life spent in a miserable way.
I meet all kinds of people who don't enjoy what they do. They simply go through their lives getting on with it. But I also meet people who love what they do and couldn't imagine doing anything else. If you said to them, don't do this anymore, they'd wonder what you were talking about. Because it isn't what they do, it's who they are. And it's not true of enough people.
But I'm exactly where I wanted to be because I realized I got to commit my very being to this thing. I gotta breathe it, I gotta eat it, I gotta sleep it. And until you get there, you'll never be successful in life. But once you get there, I guarantee you, the world is yours. I'm gonna say it again, I'm gonna hurt somebody. I'm gonna hurt somebody. We're talking about sacrifice now. The most important thing is this, to be able at any moment to sacrifice what you are for what you will become. I guarantee you, whatever it is you want to do in life, you'll be able to do.
So if you're doing something you love, an hour feels like 5 minutes. If you're doing something that doesn't resonate with your spirit, 5 minutes feels like an hour.
Therefore, it's so important to consider this question. What do I desire?
Work hard and you can have whatever it is you want.
Thank you to Lee Swords, who made that video for all of us. I don't know about you, but I love what I do. And I'm hoping that you do too, otherwise you wouldn't be here.
Let's suppose I do this often.
And it's still going, because it means so much to all of us, apparently. I think I pressed the repeat button. Anyway, welcome to Zeitgeist Day 2014. It's an absolute pleasure to have you all here. A couple of housekeeping points that I forgot before, or rather I didn't enter into. First one is a couple of thanks. I'd like to thank, as always, the inveterate and somewhat veteran Tom Williams for being the backbone of today. Would you please give him a round of applause for everything he's done? And in advance, we'll thank all of our lovely speakers. Good night. I'm just kidding. So yes, we have Jim Phillips, who's going to be chatting later about, he's going to be talking to you like a child. So you might as well settle in for that one. We have a couple of first-time speakers as well. Later on, we'll have Desmond Kilroy, who belongs to the Center for the Advancement of a Steady State Economy, CAS it's called. He'll join us just after 8 o'clock. We also have Mel. She's told me not to bother with her last name because I will ruin it, and that is probably true. Mel will be her first-time speaker as well, so please welcome her when she comes on stage after me. And later on in the evening, this is what everyone's really come for. We have Mr. Rao Reynolds of Enter Shikari here in the building, ladies and gentlemen. Our very own media producers have come to talk to us about what it's like to be an artist, a musician in the corporate culture that we find ourselves in, what that might mean, and how it's fun and all the rest of it. I won't spoil the ending for you, but it's a good one. Okay, I think that's about it. No, it isn't. You'll notice this funny orange television near me. It's not mine, not yet. But that belongs to a gentleman, if you follow on Troll Facebook a lot, you will know a gentleman called Michael Green, who does this for a living. He designs televisions with meaningful and interesting and crazy alternative messages plastered on them. We're raffling this at his behest, so that he may continue doing those things. The money won't go to us, of course. And it's right here. Come and inspect it. And then during the break, which is later on at some point, we'll put it at the back, and he'll be selling raffle tickets. So if you feel like supporting him, I recommend you do so. I'm going to do the same myself. Fire exits. If there is a fire, that's due to an outdated economic system. I don't know what you're clapping for. I think it's a horrendous state of affairs. Isn't that why we're here? But no, if there is a fire, please run over each other, not helping each other or being empathic in any kind of way. And don't head for the bright green signs that say exit on them, because that is indeed the fire exit. In all seriousness, please do get out quickly, because it's made of fucking wood, this place. Outdated economic system. Okay. Time to stop blathering like an idiot and get on with things. In the next week, in fact, in a week's time, I have to talk to the London Futurists about what we do and why the Zeitgeist movement, and to offer people who are very au fait and very up to date with the levels of technology that are possible, and to some degree also, by the way, why they're not implemented. These people are people who tend to understand most of this stuff. So I decided to try and put together something. I've got to do in 18 minutes as well, which is an interesting one. But I've tried to put something together that doesn't actually go the normal route. We have, in previous years, in the past 5 years at least, talked quite a lot about planned obsolescence, technological unemployment, the advancing ecological degradation of the world and its despoilation, and most appropriately also that the fact that these things are not factored into the economic system that is running like a program to begin with. They actually know a lot of that stuff. So I was trying to think of a way to describe our movement as a necessary undercurrent to any of the activist communities, something that actually you would have to agree with even if you didn't endorse the Zeitgeist movement directly, if you didn't think that we were doing a worthwhile job. And so that's what I've tried to do here, and I would like your feedback on it, but most of all, I'd like you to enjoy it. I call this updating technical values and hacking culture lag because David Wood from the London Futurists asked me to give him a name before I'd written it. So that's what I came up with. But for anybody who doesn't know, and I think some of you might, culture lag has quite a few different definitions. There is a burgeoning subculture of academia that studies this. And they have invariably come up with definitions like it's the length of time that a human being needs to actually, it's the lag, it's the difference between the current values that we have and the values of the system, the things that are actually possible, the things that are coming to the fore. And we can think of hilariously outlandish examples, people like Alex Jones, for example, or the Westboro Baptist Church, who have such strident values that they advertise themselves almost a priori as being extremely out of step with the rest. In fact, you might even find that they take pride in that. But the best example I found, and the one that fits our purposes quite nicely, is this, and it comes from a newspaper article. It's cultural lag is the term first coined by anthropologists to describe the gap between an invention and society's ability to actually use it. Note that word, ability. It's not that, they feel like doing it, that it's some sort of emotional connection. It's that there are a whole level of technical reasons why a mobile phone only becomes useful when lots of people have the mobile phone. Otherwise, who are you going to call? Or is everyone still calling landlines? In which case, why have a mobile phone? So it's really a technological basis to it. That I think goes fairly unexpressed quite a lot of the time. Now, culture lag changes when paradigm shifts occur. And we probably can't deliberately and quickly call to our brains any particular paradigm shift because they tend to happen quite slowly. But I'll give you, to my mind, one paradigm shift now and another one at the end that I think we can almost put down to individual days. Does anybody know where this is? No? Egypt. It's a good guess in that it's completely wrong. That, believe it or not, dear Londoners, that is Westminster. That's Westminster Bridge in 1808, a mere 200 and something years ago. And I would probably get disagreement from the scientists and probably from a lot of historians for what I'm about to say. But I reckon that on the 3rd of September, 1802, a mere 6 years before that painting, in other words, probably quite similar to that, that we saw a paradigm shift occur here. And the reason being that this gentleman, William Wordsworth, wrote quite a famous poem on that bridge called Composed Upon Westminster Bridge, 3rd of September, 1802. And in it, this gent from the Lake District, who was very famous in poetic circles for his romanticism. In fact, he operated throughout the Romantic era, they call it in English literature. The love of nature, the beauty of it, the inspiration one gleans from it, almost the metaphysical feeling one gets from it. That's what his deal was. I wandered lonely as a cloud. You might know that one. That was written about, well, in part about the Lake District as well. But he finds himself in the early morning on Westminster Bridge and says, "Earth hath not anything to show more fair. Dull would he be of soul, who could pass by a sight so touching in its majesty. This city now doth like a garment wear the beauty of the morning, silent bear." In other words, the chap who was from the countryside has suddenly seen beauty in the metropolis. Now, you might find it quite interesting. The next line, "Ships, towers, domes, theaters, temples lie open unto the fields and to the sky." Can you imagine seeing fields from Westminster Bridge? But you could a mere 200 years ago. But he saw beauty in it. And I maintain to you that that is the cultural moment where we fell in love with our metropolises, where our culture caught on to what it is to live in a city. Of course, we'd lived in cities long before that, but I think this is where we learned to love living in cities. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call culture. It's not the same as just a habit. It's when you are emotionally invested in the type of life you lead. And it's rather beautiful. Now, let's have a look at what it looks like today. I think with the audience that we have here, the first thought was, where can we get eggs and rotten tomatoes from? Because, of course, we know that building rather well. But it has updated, and so have we. And we now have our own comfort zones within this kind of place. So let me summarize my state of affairs so far. So we can say that culture can be generally summed up as the social and emotional symptoms of the method of life at any given time. It is what is normal, it is what is self-evident, unquestionable, obvious, goes without saying, undeserving of debate or analysis. It is that which is sort of acquired through common sense. It's how we are most disposed in general towards the great social engine that we are girded up by. And of course, these days we're surrounded by the great edifices and engines of the Second Industrial Revolution and all the concomitant effects of modern capitalism. Now, there are quite a few remarkable facts about these sort of sets of values, these paradigms that have existed throughout the ages and sort of every cultural revolution. No matter how much the common beliefs and assumptions actually deviate from reality or from the prior cultural value sets, each society considers their values and ways of operating and conducting life as part of the natural order. It's totally normal. It's totally fine. Nothing weird about it at all. Thomas Kuhn, who was writing in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, in 1962, put forth the description of a paradigm as an internally coherent structure of ideas and dispositions and assumptions about the world, which interlock to create a sort of self-sustaining and self-supporting worldview. So powerful and convincing are these sets of understandings that they essentially replace reality with their own logic. And any paradigm is therefore self-sustaining, self-propagating, self-defending. This is why people get very furious when you question their belief system, because it feels like you're questioning reality itself, and therefore you're crazy. But the frame of understanding and research, which is always claiming a reference to the real world. I'll give you an example. Austrian economics had to invent a whole science called praxeology so that it could be in line with the natural world. Unfortunately, it's not undergirded by modern scientific thought or anything at all, really. But it's there, and it's there for that reason. It is invented or sometimes borrowed from other trains of thought. But this is always reinforced as natural, and to confront or criticize it is to go against nature, reality, common sense, and every other assertion of dogma, be it religious dogma, be it, or most trenchantly, actually, economic dogma. That's the one that's really defended the most these days, because it's the most powerful one. I'll give you a couple of examples that we're all going to laugh at because we're so much more enlightened these days, aren't we? This power of force of belief can be seen if you look backwards first. I'll take scientific and physical reference, those ones. For example, consider this. That is the tooth worm. It goes back as far as 1800 BC in Mesopotamia. And it was the belief that caries, holes in your teeth, were created by tooth worms. Do you reckon they had any physical evidence for that? Do you think they had any observed tooth worms in those almost 4,000 years? I say almost 4,000 years for a reason. When do you reckon we abandoned this belief? Got to have been like 17th century, right? Elizabethan times? Come on, modern dentistry, surely. Later? No, early 1900s. Yeah, last century. Almost within living memory. That's how strong paradigms are. It doesn't matter about evidence. There are pages and pages. I did some research on this. There are whole academic papers, not just written on the history of the tooth worm, but on how they're real. And they are peer-reviewed and they're published, so let that sink in. But these things last for a very long time. And we, of course, think it's hilarious, don't we? I mean, just imagine if I were in Leeds to set up a dentistry. Follow me on this thought experiment. I advertise myself in Yellow Pages as the newest dentist. And you know what? I'm bringing back treatment for tooth worms because there's 4,000 years evidence for that shit. It's going to be fantastic. What would happen? People would laugh at me, hopefully. They would scorn me. In fact, you would probably get very, very upset people saying that I'm endangering public health with all this nonsense. And we know better than this. And come on, isn't that terrible? Update. Now, I want you to remember that particular feeling, that it's morally reprehensible to be propagating outdated worldviews, and it might be a danger to public health. Might start sounding quite familiar to you. But bear it in mind, because we're going to be talking about it again later, of course. Tuck it away, meantime. Well, how about another one? If you were alive during the Jeffersonian era, you would believe in, probably, if you were a chemist, you would believe in the phlogiston theory. Our greatest chemist, a guy who was also from Leeds, I'll let you draw the comparisons, was Joseph Priestley, one of the greats. He discovered 9 different gases, including oxygen, although he named it the wrong thing. He called it dephlogisticated air, and the reason for that being there used to be a theory that would explain flammableness, fire, combustion. They didn't understand what it was, because we didn't know what oxygen was yet. And Priestley put forth or defended the idea that existed in scientific circles. I think Robert Boyle started it, that every certain types of materials contain this element called phlogiston, P-H-L-O-G, yeah, you can see it there. Really crazy thing. And that's essentially what combusts and leaves you with the ash and the dephlogisticated air. He meant carbon dioxide. And it was disproved. It was disproved through, you guessed it, science. It was disproved through feedback from the physical world, where somebody, I think it was a French chap, Lavoisier, his name was, who isolated something in a tube, so there was definitely just the air that was there, and he set fire to it, and guess what? It was heavier after oxidation, because it had added something. I think it was magnesium. And he said, okay, come on, it can't be that something is leaving it then. It's got to be something else. And Priestley then said, well, that means phlogiston has a negative mass. It's -3 grams. In other words, he would happily contravene known physical laws about the universe in order to maintain his worldview. That's something we've seen as well. So these people, great minds that they are, that's one of the best chemists the world has ever seen. The American Chemical Society, they have something called the Priestley Medal. These are given to the best chemists in the world. He's very much respected. He's not some kook who got it wrong and then no one remembers him. Priestley's got statues all over the place. He's one of the great heroes of modern science. But he got this wrong, and he went to such lengths to keep it as his pet theory. Very much like I keep my pet theory about Westminster Bridge being the beginning of all modern culture. But that's fine, because I'm right. But it just shows you that often the most well-respected academics and the people who are really good at stuff will defend the wrong things. And that is probably familiar to you as well. So there we go. And of course, there's another one as well. If you were in ancient Greece, you would de facto support slavery. You would think it's normal. It would be against nature not to have it. How else are you going to get the crops in, right? And if you were alive during the 16th century or the 17th century, just about, until 1688 anyway, you'd believe in the divine right of kings. Now, if Queen Elizabeth, God look after her brave heart, there's two things I've just invoked that I don't believe in, if she were to say tomorrow in public, in an untarnished way, I am your queen because God says so, what do you reckon would happen in this country? Right? No, we've thrown out that particular level. We haven't thrown out the position, but we've thrown out the justification for it. So these are all things across time. And you'll notice how different they are and how varied they are. This one is now in essentially social and political areas. So we've had physical stuff. We've had phlogiston and toothworms. Now we've got things like the rule of man over each other, or the rule of a queen or king over man or woman, people, I should say. But these things can all be party to cultural influence, and in fact are party to cultural influence, and are defended as if they were totally normal. So that's where we are coming from. Just imagine for a second that you were born into a world in which people only moved around like that. They only hopped everywhere. Right? It's a hopping world. It's a hopocracy, okay? And if you don't do it, it's weird, right? You would see overnight the conversion of any new infant into hopping, as long as they can, well, when they walk. It would probably push walking a little bit out by a couple of months. There'd be balance issues. Maybe not. Maybe we'd get better, and we'd be hopping earlier than kids walk normally, because it takes so much more skill. And they know it's going to be tricky, so we teach them earlier. And then there's, of course, problems like health and safety and the way doors work, because you've got to hop all the way through the doors. So you then build physical, architectural adaptations to what we have, based on the real world, remember. It's all real stuff, so that you can accommodate the hoppy, right? Because we live in a hopocracy, and it's normal. I don't know what you're laughing about. It's normal. We should be doing it. Right, and already you can see the power, can't you? It's ridicule and derision because it's not normal, is it? Not for you, not yet, but this is the level it works at. It's absolutely invisible, and it's met with derision. It's met with emotion every time. So yes, there we go. There we go. So let's apply it to today's era then. What paradigm are we in? Well, we live in a hierarchically organized, pyramid-organized structure, centralized large monoliths, pretty much like governments and corporations. They own the social body. They organize everything centrally. They very much listen to what you're saying centrally, and it's expansionist, and it's rooted in consumption and ownership. And larger capital demands default to being able to agree to stuff. We still use something called voting, which means we then vote for the people who then make their own decisions, whatever they are. And of course, because that is the dominant value set, we all reflect it, very much like the king who believed in the divine right of kings would have a population that believed in the divine right of kings. And the dentists who believed in toothworms would foster a population that believed in toothworms as well. Similarly, everything that you have, your present just about maintained belief in ownership and the various forms of slavery that we call employment are essentially produced by that culture in the same way. And we do all operate on that life logic. So we own things, we consume, we self-maximize just like corporations do, because we sort of have to. It's the smaller version of the larger game. And just like the toothworm, just like phlogiston, it's utterly normal. And unfortunately, the very nail in the coffin of all of it, no matter how unlinked it might be to the real world or linked to the real world, we haven't factored in the external costs of that material upon the real world to begin with. And so we will end up coming up rather short if we don't do something about it. So even those who purport themselves to be critical of the current economic system find themselves locked into the paradigm-reinforcing rhetoric with its pseudo-connection to the natural world. There was a recent article by James Howard Kunstler, who is actually a proponent of permaculture and a so-called critic of the current structure of society, and he said, capitalism is a phantom adversary. It isn't an economic system, it isn't an ideology, really, or a belief system. If the word means anything, it describes the behavior of accumulated surplus wealth in concert with the known laws of physics, the movement of energy through time and space, and the choices we make organizing society in relation to that. Notice the lock back to so-called scientific bases. How could it be any different? Well, I'll give you a comparison quotation by Jeremy Rifkin, one of the great modern economists who actually does factor in the real world into the economic thing. He says this, the first and second industrial revolutions brought with them an all-encompassing worldview that legitimized the economic system by suggesting that its workings are a reflection of the way nature itself is organized and therefore unimpeachable. So be careful. Every now and again you find even the critics are still within the same frame, are still not really addressing the root cause or the root problems. Rifkin actually makes the case, by the way, that the original industrial revolutions required centralized capital to lay down the railways, the mines, to tap the central energy reserves like oil, coal, and gas. And these were centrally located because they were centrally focused, expensive, localized points of operation. I mean, an oil field is an oil field. It doesn't appear in multiple places, not like solar or wind does. Those are decentralized by nature. So he argues, and I don't know if I agree with him or not, I don't think I'm really qualified to say, but he argues that capitalism was required. It was almost the product of the way that we had to interface with the real world. Fine. He also makes the brilliant argument that since we now have decentralized technologies, pretty much that can all go away now, and we need to grow out of it. However, this basis has bled directly into all other facets of human treatment. This sort of centralization. Schools, hospitals, prisons, barracks, these are all modeled on the centralized paradigm, on the capitalist mode of production found in factories and production lines, and all treat the human population as a production resource subservient to central capital. Any worker rights, punitive law, healthcare, or school curriculum will fall within the wider context of this centralized network and teach as well as become structurally informed via this sort of centralized model. Well, here's where it gets interesting, ladies and gentlemen. We have in the past decade seen decentralized non-top-down networks appear slowly in the public zeitgeist. Centralized energies being replaced by decentralized renewable energies that can be harvested from the environment instead of from fossil deposits. Journalism, video and audio media, news, opinion, and most importantly, academic cultural production is now distributed via the internet. Another decentralized, or what Yochai Benkler would call an end-to-end network, where the innovators are at the periphery. They are you. They're not the people who own the networks that do it. Organization of common interests and projects are now byproducts of the same system. It's almost impossible to get economists to understand this. You don't need central planning, which you do have with money, by the way, and you don't require economic calculation when the byproduct of a decentralized system is the products that you're trying to calculate for. Demand is met simply by the connection to the system and the logic of that system to be end-to-end and open. 3D printing, or to call it its proper idiom, the merging of capital goods, what used to be factories, and consumer goods, what used to be bought from the factories via third parties that are also no longer really necessary. These are also decentralizing a lot of production. People seem to pour scorn on this idea because we're early in its development. Does that still count for solar? There used to be an early development for that too. Are we still laughing at that? Not really. We know that these things get better. We know they get faster, cheaper. We know that ultimately, most importantly, and this is true of everything I'm about to listen, and it's the only thing I wanted you to take home with you, is that these elements, these developments, contain within them the seed that will destroy the market that birthed them. Okay? They are the accidental byproduct that underscore and get rid of the whole market logic that got us here. And it's been the same way with the toothworm. It's been the same way with phlogiston. Phlogiston was beaten by chemical science, even though it was a scientific chemical theory. Consumer goods are now also becoming increasingly linked to the Internet of Things, you may have heard it called, where we can now know incredible things, about washing machines and about irons that are all somehow related via the network. And that's going to change a lot of stuff about what we can know, as well as how we can know it. And where was I? Increasingly, we are arriving at decisions through these things, rather than making them, rather than asking for a particular capital good to be created. It's being invented by the 6 billion minds that we have. Not quite, about 1 billion minds actually, but as the internet grows, it's going to be more and more people doing this kind of stuff. Kickstarter, Indiegogo, GoFundMe, and I would venture Bitcoin and its corollaries, its similar ones, are now also providing sort of stopgap alternatives to the increasingly defunded and depredated by the failed centralized government/private industry revolving door. The Arts Council gets cut after cut after cut. Isn't it fantastic that we come back by creating decentralized funding platforms? Kickstarter last year gave more money to independent projects than the Center for the Development of Arts in the US, more in 1 year. Beat it already, done. So it really shows you even though we're still talking money, even though we're still talking that terrible notion, even that is adapting. Even money is adapting to the decentralized needs of the new life that we have. Most importantly, our educational model is now reversed. Now, the common claim that this reversal has happened is often got wrong. It used to be said, or it's said still by educational people now, that it used to be one teacher and lots of pupils, right? And they would didacticize out, they would tell you, like reminding you of something, maybe me, I'm the great teacher here. They would hear and they would blather away about stuff, and then you go home and you do your homework individually, right, at home, lonely, and then you come back and be told why you were wrong and all the rest of it. And they claim that the reversal that's happened is that now everybody in the class with the teacher does their homework together, and then they go home to watch the didactic videos and stuff like that. That's not actually a reversal of any kind, because you're still talking an educational institution with a timetable and all the legwork and leftovers from the school system the way it happened. What's really happened now, and it's not been recognized by the educational system because it doesn't include them, is we are learning out loud. We learn by producing things like video and books and random articles and writing our thoughts down online. That's us learning out loud as the ideas hit us and we react to them. That's homework. But we're doing it publicly. We're not doing it alone at home in a book that can never be indexed. We are producing back onto a wider broadcast network. And then you teach silently. I can't think of how many people I've met who tell me that I've taught them so much stuff. By the way, it's all wrong. But I haven't taught you anything. You were simply learning out loud. And I was silently teaching. I just produced something that someone saw once. And the only learning I've done over the last 10 years has been precisely that same model, getting stuff from other people and then broadcasting it back out again. That's the reversal in education. You can see why that's not particularly talked about, because it doesn't require all those great big institutions that are still clogging up our cities. And lastly, we have now seen the emergence of multiple efforts, both political and non-political, through the same sort of decentralized network. Online activism, despite the snarls and jibes, there's the fact, you're not doing enough, you're not doing anything really if you're an online activist. Media, journalism, organizations like our own, they exist as well, but there are phenomenal amounts of, think of all the different media outlets that wouldn't have existed had they had to manifest in physical space in the traditional way. So much stuff wouldn't exist. And they're very hard to censor. And they're very hard to keep quiet, and it's annoying how easy they get funded by those decentralized funding options that we now have. That's the big one. Now, I submit to you, who knows this? Does everyone know where that comes from? Oh, good, it's general blank stares. That's good, that means the plan's still working. I submit to you that we can learn something very interesting from Mr. Edward Snowden's recent finest delivery into the public sphere. He leaked to The Intercept, Glenn Greenwald's new manifestation online with Laura Poitras and Matt Taibbi, formerly of Rolling Stone. A massive, massive thing by JTRIG, J-T-R-I-G, a joint threats research and integrity group or some shit like that. And It goes through line by line, through the stolen slides, of which this is one, about what they will do about online activism. And there are massive amounts of complicated workflows, and the 4Ds, what are they? Deny, disrupt, degrade, deceive, destroying people's online credibility for being the activist, for having an opinion. How dare you say something in a public sphere on the internet that was built by capitalism, we think. I submit to you that the money they're spending and the effort they're doing in keeping it quiet is the self-evident proof you need that every time you go online and make something coherent that fights the system and gives a sensible and reasoned response about where we should be going is not a second wasted in your life. And they can, if they want to spy on us, they can bring it on. We'll spy back. All right, so back to our friend William Wordsworth, who had that moment, who assimilated the city structure into public consciousness in a certain way. I'd maintained quite a few of these things have happened since, but I'll give you one example of the one that I think is most important, and it's called the overview effect. And it's when the great astronauts, of which there are woefully few, finally made their way into space, and they look back at the tiny window of the world, the tiny little spot that we live on, the pale blue dot, as Carl Sagan calls it. And what is it they say? Do they say, God, I wish I'd owned more things. I wish I'd had more money. No, what's the big cognitive shift that they underwent? It's something like Mr. Edgar Mitchell, who said, you develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. What's actually changed in that scenario? What has changed but the amount of information he was privy to? And that is really the first part of my presentation, technical values. Your viewpoint is not emotional. It's not made up by beliefs. It's all to do with your frame of reference. And guess what? When you take the widest frame of reference, you end up with the correct worldview for that reference. And when you understand the entire world, you have that. And I maintain that our decentralized world, the fact that you can be connected to any other human being with a computer in any sort of different way, to accidentally produce culture or do it deliberately, is a possible way that which you can have that overview effect yourself on planet Earth without expending all the CO2 and all the rest of it to get up there and see it. You can do it here, and even more importantly, you can make it happen for other people. Thank you very much, and we will now have Mel, who will come and talk to us. I've been Ben McLeish. Thank you very much.